Well, hey everyone, I am joined here for a conversation by Jhan. Jhan is a CFA charter holder and someone who has been close to the CFA exams and the CFA test prep industry for a while. So, Jhan, could you please give some of your background there on what you've been involved with in the past and how you became involved with the industry directly?
Yeah, sure. AJ, wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me. For the last 15 years, I've been UK based, originally from South Africa. I always apologize for my throat infection of an accent. It's not a throat infection, it is my South African accent. And I've been, for the majority of that time, here in London, right next to the Bank of England, actually, teaching CFA.
So how did you become, because I think you spent a good part of your CFA related career as a video instructor or a live classroom instructor and you eventually started a partnership with Kaplan. How did you even begin your journey towards becoming a CFA instructor?
Well, the majority of the time before that, I was involved with teaching, and I always knew I loved to teach. And then I began studying the CFA, and I used a number of other providers. Ended up settling with Kaplan, and I just really enjoyed the process. And because I found that material and that organization really helped me as a student, I was very enticed to join them. And then they invited me to join, so I made the terrifying transition from being
Sure.
someone studying the CFA to someone actually teaching it. And that's, I'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to know whether or not you know something, become a teacher and try to teach it. And that's where I began teaching with the full-time students, and then gradually moved into sort of a more corporate role. And I suppose that's where I find myself now, 13 and a half years later.
Okay. So you were a CFA candidate studying with Kaplan material,
Mm.
and was it before or after you passed all the exams and became a charter holder that you had some contacts at Kaplan that said, "Hey, John, would you like to be an instructor for some of our video lessons?"
Yeah, well, it's actually in the process of.
Okay.
So, you'd get through a level, and then you were told to teach it.
Hmm.
It was a pretty big incentive to get through the exam successfully, and that's the journey I took. So that's where I've been for the last few years.
And can you tell us a little bit about how teaching for CFA candidates started out for you? Were you live in classrooms? I think the pass rates were probably higher 15 years ago, and we'll also talk about pass rates later in this video. But what did the environment look like then?
We're talking about 2008, and it was a hell of an interesting time
Ah,
to be
sure.
studying finance, but also then teaching it. It was we had such an amazing period of financial history going on. Here in the UK, we had the impact of Lehman Brothers collapsing, and that resulted in the follow-on with Northern Rock, the first run in a retail bank in over 100 years in the UK. I had a new case study literally every week for every single class of this has never been happened before in history, folks. Let's have a look at it. You know, it's interesting. If you go into the history of where CFA came from, you realize that there's a very strong connection between this world of fundamental analysis and the world of Benjamin Graham and Dodd, who were essentially the chaps who gave Warren Buffett his view on value investing.
One more question on your career then, John. I understand that while you've been a instructor and lecturer for Kaplan and in your own right for CFA candidates, you're also contracted by some companies, sometimes major funds, to come in and do live lessons and sessions to their younger analysts, whom the company is hopeful will become CFA charter holders. Can you tell us a little bit about how that engagement works?
Yeah, sure. So that's more with my analyst secrets business, where I'm working in house with companies like Goldman Sachs Investment Research and Asset Management, the companies like Bailey Gifford, and with several universities like Exeter and Liverpool, where a lot of the either the universities or the firms that employ me are just basically trying to get students to a degree of, I suppose, financial literacy before they enter the workforce, or if they were newly joined to the workforce. You could argue that the CF Level 1 exam is probably the world's most grueling financial literacy exam.
Ah,
So if you look, for example, the work I do with a very excellent fund called Bailey Gifford, they bring guys from all backgrounds. It's one of their strengths, whether they be PhD students in biomedicine, something or other, whether they're architectural designers or whether they're, whatever background they are. They often put them through the CFA. And the reason why they do is because there's a degree of financial literacy that comes with doing even just the first level.
yeah.
But when you've got sort of a non-finance background, you can still hold a conversation about what's happening in the world of macroeconomics and fiscal and monetary policy. You can read some the results of hypothesis tests done on whatever basis. You'll be able to do some basic financial mathematics and have a good discussion with the guys who put together the quant funds, whatever it is. You want to have a degree of literacy. And I think that's the CFA level one does. It gives people a degree of financial literacy. And then when you go through level two and level three, it's then taking those tools that you acquire in level one and applying them to value.
Sure.
Looking to value. So I think I'm there to try to facilitate that process of financial literacy. And yeah, I really, really enjoy it.
And Jhan, that teaching that you do is through your role in your creation of AnalystSecrets.com. So can you tell us a little bit about exactly what AnalystSecrets.com is and the service that you provide there?
Yeah, so Analyst Secrets actually came off the back of one of my students that I was teaching. I was running a 5-day revision course, and I was teaching in Zurich. And one of my students came and said, "You know what, Jhan, it was great. It was a fantastic 5-day course, but we covered so much. And really, what stuck with me are all your mnemonics and quirky way of learning things and politically incorrect jokes and
Yeah.
stories and diagrams and just, I come from a non-financial background myself. I was far more interested in art than I was ever in perhaps debit and credit and ledger accounts. I've got an alternative way of seeing things, and so that's what I bring into the classroom. Lots of, like I said, mnemonics, politically incorrect jokes and storytelling, and that's the way that I learn. I learn through stories more than I do through lists and pie charts. So that's where I like to teach. And so what actually happened was a student approached me and said, I really like what you did there, but really, can't you just put all your tips and your tricks together into one little thing? I had never thought of that before, so that's how it came about. I put together all my tips and my tricks and my ways of learning things into a video series and an app, which gave birth to Analyst Secrets, and it's that sort of teaching style that then I brought into several companies and universities around the UK over the last 3 years.
And so on Analyst Secrets, someone basically can watch your video lessons on the final review type content before taking any CFA exam. You mentioned your style is to be relatable and politically incorrect and all those types of things. But why is it that teaching in that way can be beneficial to people who are trying to complete a final review before a CFA exam?
Because a person remembers a story far longer than they remember a fact. If you think about the majority of history, the majority of history was carried through in oral tradition. Before we wrote down anything, I don't think we've ever lost that innate ability. The big challenge with CFA level one specifically is the volume, and it's none of it is rocket science, but it's the ability to recall. Using this method of teaching, your recall is better. It's just a better way of remembering a lot of information in a very effective way. So I just find that using these ways of teaching, using far more diagrams and descriptive way of teaching and stories, and the more politically incorrect the joke is, the better. Chances are they're going to remember the story because you're a little bit edgy and a little bit less, I don't know, gray and black, which is what the corporate world normally is. So yeah, that's how it came about, and it seems to be going quite well,
Yeah.
and I enjoy it.
So how much of your time with AnalystSecrets.com do you spend with like current students or making current video lessons versus going to some of the universities or corporations that we talked about a little bit earlier and doing live classes there?
I use my video repertoire, the series of videos that I've recorded as a tool to accelerate the in-house learning experience. So when I go into a client, I'd often require that the students watch the videos prior to coming
Ah,
into class. And what it does, for example, if you've never seen a balance sheet, a cash flow, and an income statement before, and you've got these crazy diagrams which I build in the videos that you can see how they're built together, you're like, ah. And now in class, I can then go into the nitty-gritty detail of, okay, well, this is the way double declining balance depreciation or deferred tax works. So it's sort of it's used like that as a sort of before we have face-to-face, watch this, so it makes the face-to-face experience a bit more smooth. But then it's also used, I think, by the majority of students who buy the program by itself as a final review kind of tool.
sure.
The idea behind this was that I build a video tool that is similar to the Kaplan's secret source book, right? But in a way that it's sort of a more of a I suppose fun and politically incorrect way of learning. So it was just like a video series and a secret source book, but with my little edge in it.
Okay, so you and I have spoke about this a little bit so far previously. We're going to talk about the pass rates now for the recent CFA exams and how historically low they have been. I had a video go up that I basically hypothesized the institute was just making the exams more difficult. Very recently, they've released a video on their website, and I've already spoken about this once, where they said it was literally just because certain candidates' exams were rescheduled with the pandemic deferrals that their performance was suffering because of that. So, John, what do you make of these recent pass rates, and why do you think they're coming about? And then we'll talk about the minimum passing scores after that.
Well, let's just examine the facts. If you took the last 20 years of pass rates, these pass rates are phenomenally low. We've seen the last two sittings in July and May that 22, 23%, where historically those rates have been as high as 49%.
Mm-hmm.
More recently in the February sitting, but on average, sort of between 40 and 44%. Over the last 20 years. So to see a pass rate that drops by, I reckon, about 20, 21% on average is astounding. It is, and it was an anomaly that was repeated from one exam sitting to the next, from May to July. So, I do find that pretty phenomenal. We can't walk away from this. And I have an issue when the consensus view on the reason why that the pass rates have dropped so aggressively by a whopping 20%, almost basically halved,
Mm-hmm.
down because students are less prepared, or the stress associated with a deferral is so great that it had such a significant impact on pass rates. I'm just thinking personally for myself, and I take a vested interest in this because I've been teaching over the last year to literally thousands of students. I know for a fact the majority of them would have taken that extra time that they had if they had one or two deferrals, which many of my students had, and quite frankly, just studied more,
Right.
right?
Yeah, my sentiment has always been that in the instance of a deferral, I first of all, I would have been extremely disappointed because I was very particular about my study schedule when I was a candidate and exactly what I did 4 weeks before, 3 weeks before, 1 week before, and all that. But if it got deferred, I think I would have just spent more time studying. I don't know that I would have, in my head, told myself, hey, I've already studied 300 hours. It was more than that for me, but hey, I've already studied X amount of hours. I'm going to wait 3 months and then just study for the last week beforehand. And I've seen a lot of comments to many of my videos where people said, no, I just studied a lot more. But I have seen a couple comments where people say, yeah, it took a really big toll on me. I became less prepared overall, in my opinion. So, man, it's difficult to think that across thousands and thousands of candidates, not almost everyone, but such a large majority of them are becoming drastically less prepared because their exams were delayed.
Exactly, and I just don't buy it. I just don't. The key issue with level one is the volume. That's the big issue.
Right.
Then you could argue it's the technicality of it, but level one, it's volume. So most folk have this, if they gave themselves 5 to 6 months to prepare, which I suppose is probably the average, at least there's the average for the corporate clients that I
Yeah.
teach, they'll have a solid 5 month block. Most of them have this sort of this Damascus Road experience when they realize about a month and a half, 2 months into the process of, oh my God, there's so much here. I had no idea. There is so much here. I had no idea of the volume.
Yeah.
Well, you've got more content than the King James Bible that you need to assimilate and digest and answer questions. In the exam, you're going to be bouncing in, that 2.25 hour session repeated twice, every section from quants all the way through to portfolio management. Good luck to you. The key challenge is the volume. Now, with that in mind, given that that is the key challenge, most students have that sort of, as I said, Damascus Road experience about a month and a half, 2 months in, and then it becomes an absolute sprint. All of a sudden, the number of hours that students start studying increases aggressively. The stress levels go up. You get
Sure.
these early emails sent to you at 3 o'clock in the morning because they don't know how to calculate Macaulay duration or whatever it is. That's what happens. Now, if you were then in that position, right, and then with a month to go, whatever it is, your exam gets deferred. Well, yeah, okay, it sucks, but there's also going to be a good part of you that thinks, oh, thank you, thank you. I was,
Ah.
the key issue is the volume. You ask anybody who's gone through it before, and I'm sure you have had experience before as well. being a charter holder yourself, the key issue with level one is the volume.
Right.
I don't buy, if I was given more time, realizing how much volume there was, I would not be sad, right? For a fact, I'd be a little bit grateful. Obviously, I would gripe about it because it sucks, but I would definitely use that. So now I'm not doing 300 hours. Now I'm doing 350, 400, 450, 500 hours of prep.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective because as an exam instructor or a CFA candidate instructor, you see many folks who get into that final 4 weeks before the exam and like you mentioned, the stress levels go up and they realize how much more work there is to do. And so having an extra few months tacked onto that in that scenario would be totally beneficial. And I imagine that's a pretty significant amount of candidates who really have to start spending a lot more time than they had been in the final month before that test.
Sure, and you can see on the Reddit forum all the guys posting their results, and when they see that their result is literally within a confidence interval, a probability of passing, and you see so many of those guys who are literally on the borderline. If you ask them, if you ask them, if you had one more month, do you think you would have gotten through? The answer would have been yes.
Right.
Right? Because they could then in that one extra month have done another 3,000 questions or whatever it is, right? I know for a fact that at least the students that I've had exposure to, and there's been more than a couple that I've had exposure to over the
Right.
last 18. I've spent a lot of time talking to students over Zoom over the last 18 months, lots of students, and I know for a fact that they would have more time. They would take that time and not throw it away. Yeah, probably they wouldn't have been as hyper-productive as they might have been a month before the exam, but they would have used a large portion of that time. And given the fact that the level one exam is primarily about volume, that is valuable time. So I don't buy the hypothesis that because you have been deferred, right, that your likelihood of passing is now halved, the pass rate dropping from 40 something percent to 20 something percent
Mm-hmm.
because you've had more time to prepare. Doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, to me it doesn't make sense conceptually. I can understand where the institute's coming from with that argument, but it's such a huge decrease to the pass rate that I got to believe there's a couple factors going on there. And so let's lead into the next one, which is the minimum passing scores, which we have a pretty high degree of confidence are far higher than they ever have been historically, and that is the big part of the equation that the institute did not address in their recent video, and maybe understandably so, because they never actually say what the minimum passing scores are. We have to get these estimates from third-party sites who review thousands of candidates' results, bands, and breakdowns, and try to get a feel for how that candidate scored and whether they passed or not. But it looks like the minimum passing scores are 72, 73% or higher now. Why
Mm.
do you think they could have gotten so high? To me, it seems like either the people writing the questions are writing far easier questions, or the people evaluating the exams are much tougher than they ever were, and they are determining that a qualified CFA candidate has to do much better than they ever had to do in the past. Why are the MPSs so high?
Well, it's a good question, right? And to be honest, I don't think that video that the CFA Institute released shed light on this particular point at all. Let's go through a history lesson as to how that pass score used to be
Okay.
constructed, right? So if you were to go back in time, and we are going back a fair amount of time, from 1968 to 1977, the CFA Institute just said, okay, the pass score was 70%,
Ah.
right? That's what it was. Then they changed their methodology, and for the next bunch of years, from 78 to 89, what they would do is they would take the average of the top 1% of students, and then took 70% of that 1%, and that would be the minimum pass score. So let's assume that the top 1% scored an average of 90. Then they would take 70% of the 90, which means the minimum pass score would be 63%. Now, if you go back and look at those same estimates that we get from that third party, you can see that the minimum pass score has kind of been, for many, many years, around that 63, 64, 65% range, right? Go back and look at the same place you saw those historical trends of minimum pass scores. You can see that that was the range. And so that kind of made sense. Now, from 1989 onwards, they used that together with a combination of the modified Angoff. And the modified Angoff method was basically the idea of you asking charter holders what would a marginal candidate, somebody who's literally on the cusp of being considered to be on the good side of the line versus those
Sure.
that would not, be expected to know, right? And so they invigilate those individual questions, which was obviously far easier to do, wasn't it? When there was just one global exam everywhere,
Yeah.
and we all wrote the same exam, whether you were in Shanghai, Johannesburg, or New York, because now we've moved to this computer-based testing method. So my hypothesis is, and I am speaking in my personal capacity here. My personal opinion is that what's happened is that we are using a combination of this modified Angoff as well as that previous way of doing it, right? We
Ah,
took some top performing students and took a percentage of those top performing students together with the modified Angoff to decide what the minimum pass score is. We don't know for sure because the CFA Institute don't tell us, which is at the heart of this issue, right? But let's say that they did do that. Let's say they did take the top 1% of students, and they did take a percentage of the score, the average score of that top 1% of students, then that kind of then aligns to what I've been saying
sure.
previously, that
Yeah.
these students are more prepared, right?
Right. Especially the top 1% of students. They would have spent
The top
700
one,
hours studying now.
there's going to be those guys who are like, they just didn't stop. They were doing 2 hours a day for the 6 months prior to the first sitting. They just kept going, right? And they did 2 hours a day for the next 5 to 6 months. Now you've got 600 or 700 hours prep time under your belt, and you're going to be in that top 1%. Now, the CFA Institute, let's assume, because this is hypothesis, right, are taking that top 1% who are now massively biasly upward, right? Definitely in the long end of the tail.
Yeah.
And we're taking that as a percentage. And now we're using that together with the modified Angoff. Would that maybe explain why the minimum pass score jumped so aggressively, right? We saw that it's increased from the 60s, mid 60s to the close to the mid 70s now.
Mm-hmm.
That would kind of make sense to me.
Yeah,
That would kind
that's
of
interesting, and there's potentially a catalyst for the institute feeling like they need to do it that way. And as you mentioned, the computer-based testing, because the level one exam happens 4 or 5 times a year, maybe, and each of the other exams happen more often as well. So they may have had to statistically shift how they were grading these exams because of the quantity of offerings, and because I believe it's true that no two candidates take the exact same set of questions. Is that accurate?
well, all I can assume is that there's a pool of questions, and the likelihood of two candidates getting the same pool. Well, you know that's a combination question, isn't it?
Sure. Oh, yes. Right. Okay.
Together they can solve that for us. So you must remember that the CFA Institute was under significant pressure when they moved to this computer-based testing format. Remember that there were a lot of charter holders, I think, who were getting a little bit upset the fact the exam had been contracted from 6 hours down to 4.5 hours, that the number of questions also was
Yeah.
reduced.
Yeah. I made a few videos about that.
We made a few videos about that. And also now it's not just writing perhaps twice a year for level one, but now 4 sittings a year. Level 2 and 3, where you only used to be able to write once a year, now you got 2 times a year. And then you got that pressure. And I can't imagine that they don't read the news or the forums. That there's that building up. But then you can see in that level one pass rate jumping to 49%, the level two pass rate jumping to 56%.
Right.
Last time the pass rates were that high, I looked it up. Pass rates are 49%. The last time they were that high was in 2001. Last time level two pass rates were that high was in 2005. So it's a good 20 or 16-year period since pass rates were that high. I'm wondering if there has been perhaps a response to the CFA Institute thinking, okay, well, a 49% and a 56% pass rate is perhaps not acceptable anymore in terms of our historical norms of about 4%. Maybe we need to adjust the modified Angoff for what we're doing. And maybe there was something there that happened in the percentage they set that resulted in the pass rate plummeting to 22.
That was always my theory. I always felt like they got a lot of flack. I just remember the amount of articles and posts on Reddit and comments on YouTube videos about the pass rates being so high at that point, and if the CFA charter was going to maintain the global prestige that it had always had. And, you know, to the Institute's credit, or maybe in someone against someone arguing that it was losing prestige, when it was in its early days, the pass rates were like 95%, I think, on the level 3 exam for the first few sittings. So at some point it was a much easier exam. I just feel like the needle's going to keep moving in the opposite direction here.
What will be interesting is when we see candidates sitting now for the exam in November. So I think what's happened is that the candidates who wrote the exam in May and July, they were being essentially benchmarked against a group of 1% candidates who were massively overprepared. And now what I'm thinking that's going to happen is that once those overly prepared candidates have sat their exams and we're getting a normal caliber of student coming through, setting that benchmark, then we might see pass rates jump again. We will see in November, but that's what I guess would happen, depending on if they calculate that the top group of students pass rate on a rolling average or not. Let's see. But
Right.
I imagine once a more normal profile of students come and sit this exam, then maybe we'll see the pass rates increase and minimum pass will drop.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what the pass rates look like and minimum passing scores look like in the coming sittings once we finally have candidates who didn't have their exams deferred. We'll be able to verify or disprove a lot of the information we've been getting from the Institute here recently.
We'll be able to reject or fail to reject this
Yeah,
hypothesis.
there you go. Perfect. Perfect. Yes, you're a far better CFA level 1 instructor than I would be. I don't want to be a tutor for that
I don't
reason,
know.
but that's exactly right.
I think your videos are fantastic. So
Oh,
maybe you'll
thanks.
feature as a CFA instructor still, AJ.
So, John, thank you very much for the conversation here this morning. Where can people find you? What should viewers be looking out for on analystsecrets.com?
Sure. If you went to www.analyst-secrets.com, yeah, please do pop on, connect with me on LinkedIn if you feel like it. You're welcome to join my network. And I think it's important that anybody listening to this realize I'm not paying you to be here.
Right.
You're not paying me. But I just wanted to say thank you to for having me online, and we've put together a little token gesture. So the course normally costs $250. We're going to give you guys $100 off for the next limited while. So there'll be a code. We'll get the code in the comments, and just
Great.
want to say thank you very much for having me on and giving me a bit of exposure for my little micro micro company, Analyst Secrets. So thanks, Adrian.
Oh, not a problem, John. Happy to do it. I love getting your perspective, especially as someone who's been teaching this material for a long time. So everyone look out for that code in the description, and I'll probably link it as the top comment down below as well, so you can get $100 off if you want to sign up for analystsecrets.com. And yes, no, there's no paid promotions here. I think I'm going to post this video to my channel. John will probably share some information to his LinkedIn page, so maybe a mutually beneficial relationship, but also just a fun conversation to have. And at that, we'll go ahead.
Well, and listen, let's do a follow-up video.
Right.
Let's test our hypothesis when the results do come out in November, because I will be happy to be proven wrong. It'll be very interesting to reassess the data when we get those pass rates in November. So if you'd be happy enough to have me on again, I would love to have another chat with you, AJ. It's been a pleasure.
Certainly. Yeah, I think that'll be a perfect time to do it. So, sounds good. Well, thanks everyone. Don't forget to like the video, comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching.